Hi, you guys. We're gonna finish skill 2 on inverse functions. So you still want to be writing this down. This is what you should title this section of your notes. Take a second to pause and write the problem. Salam is walking. The function d of t given below is her distance in kilometers from Glen City after walking t hours. This is d of t. It says complete the following statements. Which best describes the inverse of d? Um, So let's take a second just to kind of think about this. Asks us like what it represents. In my D function, let's think what my input is and what my output is. So after walking T hours, I'm inputting T, so this is going to be time in hours. My output, D of T, is her distance in kilometers. So this was for D of T. The inverse would then switch those. So my input would be distance in kilometers from Glen City. My output would be T hours. So what I want you guys to do now is pause this, think through which A, B, C, or D, or a part A, option 1, 2, 3, or 4, which one of these makes the most sense. So you're taking a second to pause this, think about that. So we should have gotten this one. So for part B, asks us to take the time to actually find the inverse. So this is a little different just because it doesn't have x and y's. We can think of this multiple ways. We can change this to y and this to x and then change it back at the end. So what we would do is now we'd switch our x and our y. Sorry, that should be a y. I subtract my negative 13.5 from both sides. I divide both sides by negative 5. So what I end up with is this expression. It doesn't equal y, it equals the inverse of b when our input is x. Just like that told us. So b, inverse of d down here would be x minus 13.5 over negative 5. And then let's do c. It wants to know what that value is when the input is 7.5. So I want you guys to try to do that one on your own. Go ahead and pause the screen. You're inputting 7.5. So once you simplified the inverse of d of negative 7 or the inverse of d of 7.5, you should have gotten 1.2. So that would be how many kilometers. Sorry, we're misthinking this. That's not how many kilometers she went. Our output is now time. So she walked 1.2 hours to get that's 7.5 kilometers. So this would be 1.2 hours. Okay, so the next section we're going to talk about is how do we know if the original function has an inverse. Basically, we need it to be 1-for-1, or state rather it has an inverse. If it's 1-to-1, it will have an inverse. So we can think of that, sorry, if f of x is 1-to-1, guys, it's going crazy. Then it has inverse. We talked about that over here. If f of x passes the horizontal line test, the horizontal line crosses the graph once, then f of x does have an inverse function. So if I draw a horizontal line, does this cross this once? No, it crosses it 3 times. So this is not 1-to-1. So f of x does not have an inverse function. This one, if I draw horizontal lines, it only crosses it once. So it's yes, 1-to-1, it would have an inverse function. Here, just where I drew this line, it crosses 4 times, so it'd be no. I want you to pause the screen and try these 3 down here on your own. So you're pausing and seeing if these 3 down here are 1-to-1, aka have inverses or not. Okay, so hopefully you got something like this. We can talk about this line like we talked about last skill. When something is open, that means there's not a value there. So we only have one value at this point. So yes, it is an inverse. Or yes, it would have an inverse because it's 1-to-1. Okay, the last aspect of skill 2 we're going to talk about is determining whether 2 functions are inverses of each other. If we put, so you're going to want to write this down, especially these notes over here. If we put 2 functions inside of each other and the output is x, then they are inverses. So what we want to do is it's asking us to put f inside of g, g inside f inside g inside of f, and then f inside of g and see what we get. So let's go ahead and start with our f function, just 6x. Everywhere I see an x, it's asking me to place this g function. So this would simplify to x because those would cancel out. So f of g of x is x. Now let's see what happens when we do it the other way. So if I start with the g function, x divided by 6, and if everywhere I see a x, sorry, I made a mistake. If now inside of f, if everywhere inside of g, I now put an f function, which my f function is 6x, I would also get an x. So when I input or compose both functions, I got an x. So that means they are inverses of each other. Let's go ahead. I want you to try this with b. So you're going to put g inside of f, and then you put f inside of g. Let's go ahead and pause the screen and do this one on your own. Okay, so when we did f of g of x, we should have gotten x plus 14. G of f of x, x plus 7. Since we did not get out an x, they are not inverses of each other. So this wraps up skill 2. Make sure you guys do your homework for this, and good job.